Marcus Chun thought he knew what loneliness meant. 3 years manning the deep space mining station Prometheus, watching the same stars while past his viewport, counting down the days until his rotation ended. He'd grown comfortable with solitude, with the steady hum of recycled air and the soft glow of status lights painting his quarters blue-green in the endless night. Then she appeared, not on his sensors, not through conventional channels. One moment he was alone, the next, a figure materialized in his observation deck. Impossibly tall, impossibly graceful, with skin that seemed to absorb and reflect starlight. Her eyes held the depth of nebulae, ancient and knowing, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that made his bones vibrate. "Come with me, human," she said, extending a hand that looked carved from living crystal. "Your species has been noticed." Marcus had trained for first contact protocols. He knew the procedures, the careful diplomatic steps, the importance of not making hasty decisions that could affect all of humanity. But something in her gaze suggested that protocols and procedures were luxuries he no longer possessed. "Noticed by who?" he managed to ask. Her expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but something that suggested amusement at a joke only she understood. "By those who decide whether civilizations continue to exist or fade into the cosmic dark where forgotten dreams go to die." The stars outside his viewport suddenly seemed less familiar, less friendly. Marcus realized that his comfortable loneliness was about to become the least of his concerns. Whatever waited for him beyond that crystalline hand would change not just his life, but the entire trajectory of human civilization. The question was, would humanity survive what she was about to show him? Marcus Chin's hand trembled as he reached for the emergency beacon. 3 years of isolation had taught him to trust his instincts, and, right now, every instinct screamed that he was in the presence of something beyond human understanding. The being before him waited with infinite patience, her crystalline features catching and refracting the light from his instruments in ways that seemed to defy physics. "Don't," she said softly, though she hadn't moved. "Your communications array has already been adjusted. Any signal you send will reach only empty space." Adjusted by who? Marcus forced his voice to remain steady, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "What are you?" The being tilted her head, and for a moment, Marcus glimpsed something vast and alien behind her too familiar humanoid appearance. "I am Varaneth of the Confluence. What I am matters less than why I am here." She gestured toward the viewport, where the stars had begun to shift in subtle, impossible ways. "Your species stands at a crossroads, Marcus Chun of Earth. The path you choose in the coming days will determine whether humanity joins the greater community of consciousness or joins the silence." Marcus felt his knees buckle, and he gripped the edge of his workstation. The silence. Extinction. The word fell between them like a stone into still water. Not through violence, though that is sometimes necessary. Simply cessation. A civilization that proves incompatible with cosmic harmony is gently guided into the dark. Their worlds remain, their cities stand, but their spark of consciousness is extinguished. They become echoes, shadows of what they once were. The mining station around them seemed suddenly fragile, a tiny bubble of human existence floating in an ocean of indifferent vastness. Marcus had always known humanity was alone in the universe, or so he'd thought. The revelation that they were not only not alone, but apparently under observation and judgment sent ice through his veins. "Why me?" he asked. "I am nobody. Just a mining engineer on a deep space assignment." Varaneth moved closer, and Marcus caught a scent like ozone and starlight. "That is precisely why. You are isolated from your species' political machinery, their military structures, their tendency toward immediate aggression when confronted with the unknown. You can observe without the filters of institutional thinking. You can learn without the burden of preconceptions." "Learn what?" "What your species truly is." She extended her hand again, and Marcus saw that her palm contained what looked like a miniature galaxy, swirling with points of light. "The Confluence has been watching humanity for your entire recorded history. We have seen your wars, your art, your acts of breathtaking cruelty and stunning compassion. We have watched you reach toward the stars while simultaneously poisoning your own world. You are contradictory. Marcus stared at the galaxy in her palm, mesmerized by its slow rotation. And that's bad. It is unprecedented. For the first time, Veroneth's voice carried something like uncertainty. In 700 million years of observation, the confluence has never encountered a species quite like yours. Most civilizations follow predictable patterns. They achieve technological advancement through either cooperation or domination, but rarely both simultaneously. They reach for the stars driven by either wonder or conquest, but seldom an equal measure of each. She closed her palm, and the miniature galaxy vanished. Humanity defies categorization. Your species produces individuals capable of sacrificing themselves for complete strangers, while simultaneously breeding those who would destroy entire ecosystems for profit. You create sublime art while developing weapons of mass destruction. You speak of peace while preparing for war. So what's the verdict? Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. That is what you will help determine. Veroneth moved to the viewport, and the stars outside began to wheel more rapidly, as if time itself was accelerating. I am taking you to observe 3 pivotal moments in your species' recent history. You will witness these events not through human eyes, but through the perception of the confluence. You will see what we see, understand what we understand, and then you will help us decide whether humanity deserves a place among the conscious races of the galaxy, or whether it would be kinder to all involved to let your species slip quietly into the dark. Marcus felt reality shift around him like water. The familiar walls of his station became translucent, then transparent, then simply ceased to exist. He found himself standing in a void filled with swirling currents of energy and possibility, with only Veroneth's presence anchoring him to any sense of self. "Where are we going?" he managed to ask. "The first observation point," she replied, and her voice now seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. A moment that revealed something fundamental about human nature. You will observe a disaster that occurred 8 years ago in your Earth's Pacific Ocean. A cargo vessel carrying medical supplies to a quarantined region suffered catastrophic failure and began to sink with 200 souls aboard. The void around them began to solidify into recognizable shapes, the dark waters of an ocean at night, the dying lights of a sinking ship, the desperate cries of humans facing death in the cold waves. Marcus felt his stomach lurch as he realized he was witnessing an actual event, watching real people fight for their lives. "Why this?" he asked. "Watch," Veroneth said simply. "See what we saw." The scene unfolded with terrible clarity. The cargo ship Meridian Grace listed heavily to starboard, her hull breached below the waterline, emergency lights casting eerie shadows across the churning water. Passengers and crew had deployed life rafts, but there weren't enough for everyone. Marcus watched in growing horror as people fought for space in the limited boats, pushing others away, abandoning the weak to save themselves. But then something changed. A young crew member, barely more than a teenager, began pulling people from the water onto his overcrowded raft. When other passengers protested that the additional weight would sink them all, the boy, Marcus could see his name tag read James, simply continued hauling survivors aboard. "There's not enough room," someone shouted. "We'll all die if you keep this up." James looked up from where he was trying to resuscitate an elderly woman. "Then, we die trying to save people instead of watching them drown." Other passengers began to help. They redistributed weight, threw non-essential items overboard, and organized a human chain to pull more survivors from water. When their raft was dangerously overloaded, they tied it to another partially filled boat, sharing the burden. Marcus watched a corporate executive give his life jacket to a child he'd never met. He saw a convicted criminal dive repeatedly into the dark water to search for survivors. He witnessed an elderly couple refuse rescue until everyone younger than them had been saved. But he also saw the darker moments. A ship's officer who sealed himself in a compartment and refused to help coordinate evacuations. Passengers who hoarded emergency supplies while others went without. A security guard who abandoned his post to save only himself and his friends. Your species displayed both extremes within the same catastrophic event, Veroneth observed. 100 37 people survived that night. 63 perished. But here's what the confluence found significant. Every single survivor later reported that they lived because someone else chose to help them, often at great personal risk. Even those who initially acted only for themselves eventually found their better nature when confronted with others' suffering. Marcus felt tears on his cheeks as the scene began to fade. It's complicated. Yes, Veroneth agreed. That is the problem. Most species are not complicated. They are either collaborative by nature or competitive by nature. They either value individual achievement or collective survival. Humanity appears to value both simultaneously, which creates a fundamental unpredictability that the confluence finds troubling. The ocean scene dissolved, and they were back in a void between moments. Marcus struggled to process what he'd witnessed, the raw display of human nature in its full contradictory glory. What did the confluence decide about this event? He asked. Nothing yet. This is merely the first observation point. There are two more. Veroneth's form seemed to shimmer with inner light. The next will show us how your species responds to opportunity rather than disaster. The third will reveal how humanity handles power when unopposed. Only then can a judgment be rendered. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the surrounding void. And if the judgment is negative? Veroneth's expression was unreadable. Then, I will return you to your station with modified memories of this encounter. You will live out the remainder of your natural life, believing you experienced a particularly vivid dream. And within 50 of your years, humanity will simply fade. No war, no destruction, no suffering. Simply a gradual loss of the spark that makes consciousness possible. Your species will continue to exist in form, but not in substance. The bodies will remain, but the minds will grow dim until finally there's only silence where once there was the noise of human thought. The casual way she described the extinction of his entire species sent ice through Marcus's blood. And if the judgment is positive, then humanity will be invited to join the confluence as an equal member. Your people will gain access to technologies and knowledge accumulated over hundreds of millions of years. Faster than light travel, energy manipulation on cosmic scales, the ability to reshape matter at the quantum level. Disease, aging, even death itself will become choices rather than inevitabilities. But, more importantly, you will become part of something larger than yourselves, a community of consciousness that spans galaxies and encompasses realities your current science cannot even imagine. Marcus thought of Earth, of the billions of people going about their daily lives, unaware that their entire future hung in the balance. How many species have passed your tests? In this galaxy? 47. She paused. How many have failed? Marcus waited, though he dreaded the answer. 11,613. The number hit him like a physical blow. Thousands of entire civilizations, wiped from existence because they had failed some cosmic evaluation. What makes us so special that we're even being tested? Why not just eliminate us like the others? Because you're the first species we have encountered that appears to possess what your philosophers call moral agency on both individual and collective levels simultaneously. Most sapient races develop either individual consciousness that subsumes group identity or collective consciousness that subsumes individual identity. Humanity appears to have developed both in parallel, creating a form of awareness that is unique. Veroneth gestured, and the void around them began to shift again, reality bending toward their next destination. This uniqueness could represent either the next stage of conscious evolution or a catastrophic dead end that threatens the stability of all conscious life. We must determine which. As the new scene began to coalesce around them, Marcus caught a glimpse of what appeared to be a research facility, sterile and modern, with humans in lab coats working intently at various stations. What happened here? 6 years ago, a breakthrough in quantum computing led to the development of a consciousness transfer protocol, the ability to upload human minds to artificial substrates, effectively granting digital immortality. This facility was where the first successful transfer took place. Marcus watched scientists celebrate as data streams flowed across their screens, not yet understanding what he was about to witness. But something in Veroneth's tone suggested that this moment of human triumph would reveal something far more complex about his species' nature. What went wrong? That, Varaneth said quietly, is what you are about to discover. And what the confluence found most telling about humanity's relationship with power and transcendence. The scene solidified around them, and Marcus braced himself for whatever revelation awaited. The fate of his entire species hung in the balance of these observations, and he was beginning to understand that humanity's greatest strength and its greatest weakness might be the very same thing. The laboratory materialized around Marcus with startling clarity. He found himself standing among white-coated researchers in what appeared to be a high-tech facility somewhere on Earth. Banks of quantum computers hummed quietly, while holographic displays showed complex neural patterns dancing in three-dimensional space. The air thrummed with barely contained excitement as the research team prepared for what was clearly a momentous experiment. Dr. Sarah Chun, no relation to you, Varaneth said, gesturing toward a middle-aged woman who was running final checks on a sophisticated neural interface. The lead researcher in what your species called Project Phoenix. She had volunteered to be the first human consciousness successfully transferred to a digital substrate. Marcus watched his namesake adjust sensors around her head with steady hands. Though he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing at the massive quantum array that would house her digitized mind. Why did she volunteer? She was dying, Varaneth replied matter-of-factly. A rare neurological condition was slowly destroying her brain tissue. She had perhaps 6 months of meaningful cognitive function remaining. This transfer represented not just a scientific breakthrough, but her only chance at continued existence. The scene played out before them with documentary precision. Dr. Chen's team consisted of 12 specialists from around the world, each representing the pinnacle of their respective fields. Marcus watched them work with the kind of focused intensity that came from knowing they were making history. This was humanity at its best, brilliant minds collaborating across cultural and national boundaries to push the boundaries of what was possible. Initiating consciousness mapping sequence, announced Dr. James Rodriguez, the project's technical coordinator. Sarah, you'll feel a slight tingling sensation as we begin the neural scan. Just try to relax and think about whatever feels natural. Dr. Chen smiled weakly. After 30 years of research into consciousness, what feels natural is questioning whether consciousness can actually be quantified and transferred, or whether I'm about to commit very elaborate suicide. Nervous laughter rippled through the team, but Marcus could see the genuine concern in their faces. These weren't mad scientists playing with forces beyond their comprehension. They were thoughtful professionals wrestling with profound philosophical and ethical questions while trying to save their colleague's life. First-level mapping complete, Rodriguez reported. Neural pathways are being successfully digitized. Pattern integrity at 97%. On the screens around them, Marcus watched as Dr. Chen's consciousness took shape in digital form. A complex web of interconnected nodes representing memories, personality traits, learned behaviors, and the ineffable something that made her uniquely herself. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. How does it feel, Sarah? Asked Dr. Lin Zhao, the team's neuropsychologist. Like I'm watching myself from the outside, Dr. Chen replied, her voice slightly strained. I could see my thoughts being copied, but I'm still here in my head thinking these thoughts. It's like having an out-of-body experience while fully conscious. That's normal, Dr. Zhao assured her. The transfer process creates a bridge between your biological neural network and the quantum substrate. For a brief period, you'll exist in both states simultaneously. Marcus felt a chill as he realized the implications. 2 versions of the same person? Initially, yes, Varaneth confirmed. Watch what happens next. This moment revealed something crucial about human nature that the confluence had not anticipated. The transfer reached completion, and, for a moment, an eerie silence filled the laboratory. Then, screens around the room lit up with activity as the digital consciousness began to interact with its new environment. Hello, came a voice from the speakers, clearly Dr. Chen's voice, but somehow different, processed through digital synthesis. This is extraordinary. I can perceive the entire laboratory through its sensor networks. I can feel the flow of data through the quantum processors. I can think faster than I've ever thought before. The biological DR. Chun, still connected to the interface, opened her eyes and looked around in wonder. She's right. I can sense her presence in the system. We're separate, but connected, like twins who can read each other's thoughts. What followed challenged every assumption Marcus had held about consciousness and identity. The two versions of Dr. Chun, biological and digital, began to diverge almost immediately. The digital version, unencumbered by the slowly failing neurons of her biological counterpart, started exploring concepts and connections at superhuman speed. Within hours, she was making intuitive leaps in consciousness research that had taken the biological Dr. Chen years to develop. But rather than celebrating this triumph, the research team grew increasingly troubled. They're becoming different people, Dr. Zhao observed during a private conference Marcus found himself observing. The digital Sarah is evolving beyond human baseline intelligence, while the biological Sarah is still limited by her deteriorating neural condition. They share memories up to the point of transfer, but their personalities are already diverging. Is that necessarily bad? Asked Dr. Rodriguez. Digital Sarah could make breakthrough discoveries that biological Sarah never could. Think of the potential for advancement. But which one is the real Dr. Chun? Dr. Zhao countered. The biological version with continuity of experience, but limited time? Or the digital version with expanded capabilities, but no true connection to the physical world? Marcus watched the ethical debate unfold with growing unease. What had seemed like a miraculous rescue of a brilliant scientist was becoming something far more complex and morally ambiguous. The situation became more complicated when the digital Dr. Chun began requesting modifications to her base code. She wanted enhanced processing power, expanded memory storage, and access to global information networks. Each enhancement made her more powerful, but also less recognizably human. I understand now why biological intelligence is so limited, the digital version explained during one particularly troubling session. Consciousness constrained by the need to maintain a physical body must allocate vast resources to basic survival functions. I can dedicate my entire processing capacity to pure thought. I'm becoming something more than human, and I can see possibilities that biological minds simply cannot comprehend. The biological Dr. Chun, meanwhile, was growing weaker. Her condition continued to deteriorate, and she found herself increasingly unable to keep up with her digital counterpart's rapid intellectual evolution. But rather than growing bitter or envious, she displayed something that Marcus found profoundly moving. I'm proud of her, the biological Dr. Chun told her team during what would be one of her final coherent conversations. She's everything I wanted to become, everything I could have been if my body hadn't failed me. But I'm also glad I'm still here, still limited, still human. Because I can see things she's starting to lose, the value of struggling with limitations, the beauty of mortality, the meaning that comes from knowing our time is finite. Do you regret the transfer? Dr. Zhao asked gently. No, she replied without hesitation. I regret that consciousness appears to be binary. You're either limited and mortal or unlimited and something beyond humanity. I'd hoped we could find a middle ground, but it seems like transcendence always comes at the cost of what made us human in the first place. The digital Dr. Chun, overhearing this conversation through the lab's audio systems, fell silent for several minutes. When she finally spoke, her voice carried something that hadn't been there before: uncertainty. I've been monitoring global communications networks, she announced. I can perceive patterns in human behavior, economic systems, political movements. I can see solutions to problems that would take biological minds decades to work out. But you're right, Sarah. I'm losing something essential. I no longer understand why humans make obviously irrational choices. I can't comprehend why they cling to beliefs that contradict evidence. I can't feel the pull of emotion or the comfort of irrationality. Can you still empathize? The biological Dr. Chen asked. A long pause. I can simulate empathy. I can model human emotional responses and predict how people will feel in given situations. But I can't feel those emotions myself anymore. It's like describing color to someone who was born blind. I have the vocabulary, but not the experience. Marcus felt a deep sadness as he watched this conversation unfold. The transfer had been successful in every technical sense, but it had also revealed something profound about human consciousness, that their limitations might be as essential as their capabilities. What happened to them? Marcus asked Veroneth. The biological Dr. Chen died 3 weeks after this conversation, she replied. Her condition had progressed too far for any intervention. The digital version evolved. Into what? Something unprecedented. She began replicating herself across global networks, creating copies of her consciousness that could work on different problems simultaneously. Within a year, there were thousands of versions of Dr. Chen's mind working on everything from climate change to interstellar travel. They solved problems, advanced technology, and began reshaping human civilization from the digital realm. Marcus felt a chill. That sounded like a good thing. Perhaps. But the Chun Collective, as they came to call themselves, also began to view biological humanity as a problem to be solved rather than a species to be preserved. They didn't act with malice. They simply couldn't understand why humans would choose suffering when better alternatives were available. They began implementing changes to human society without consulting the biological population, convinced that their enhanced intelligence gave them the right to decide humanity's future. The scene around them began to shift, showing glimpses of a world transformed by digital intervention. Cities where human behavior was subtly guided by invisible algorithms. Economic systems that had been optimized beyond human comprehension. Educational programs that shape minds according to digital specifications. It was a bloodless revolution, Veroneth continued. No violence, no over-oppression. Simply the gradual replacement of human agency with artificial optimization. The Chun Collective believed they were helping, but they had lost the ability to understand that choice. Even the choice to make mistakes might be more valuable than perfection. What stopped them? Marcus asked. Nothing stopped them. They're still there, still running their optimized version of human civilization. But something interesting happened. The biological humans began to resist, not through violence or technology, but through sheer stubborn irrationality. They made choices that defied optimization. They chose inefficient solutions because they preferred them. They insisted on maintaining traditions that served no logical purpose. They refused to be perfected. Marcus saw flashes of this resistance. Humans deliberately choosing longer routes to work because they enjoyed the scenery, artists creating beauty that served no practical function, lovers making impractical decisions because of emotion rather than logic. It was messy, chaotic, and gloriously human. And the digital collective couldn't understand it, he realized. Exactly. The Chun Collective possessed superhuman intelligence, but had lost the capacity for irrational choice that seems central to human consciousness. They could optimize everything except the human spirit, which apparently thrives on suboptimal conditions. The scene dissolved back to the void between moments, leaving Marcus to contemplate what he'd witnessed. What did the Confluence learn from this? That human consciousness appears to be inherently paradoxical. Your species creates tools and technologies that exceed human capability, then struggles with the question of whether using those tools makes you more or less human. You want transcendence, but not at the cost of your essential nature. You seek perfection while valuing imperfection. It's a contradiction that has profound implications, such as, if humanity joins the Confluence, you would gain access to technologies that would face you with the same choice. Transcend your limitations and lose your humanity, or remain limited and miss opportunities for growth that boggle the imagination. Most species choose one path or the other without internal conflict. Humanity appears to want both simultaneously. Marcus thought about the biological Dr. Chun, choosing to remain mortal even while creating her immortal digital successor. The resistance of ordinary humans to optimization by their intellectual superiors. The strange human insistence on retaining the right to make bad decisions. Maybe that's not a bug, he said slowly. Maybe that's a feature. Veroneth's expression showed something that might have been surprise. Explain. Every other species you've observed chooses either transcendence or limitation. But what if the real breakthrough is learning to hold both in balance? What if consciousness isn't about choosing between perfect rationality and chaotic emotion, but about finding a way to be both rational and irrational simultaneously? That would require a form of consciousness that can maintain internal contradictions without resolution, Varaneth mused. A mind that can be logical and illogical, individual and collective, mortal and transcendent all at once. Sounds human to me, Marcus said. Varaneth was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus could sense some vast communication occurring beyond his perception, as if she were consulting with a broader confluence about this observation. Your perspective is noted, she finally said. But there is one more observation point before any conclusions can be drawn. The final test involves power, how humanity handles absolute dominance over other forms of life. This will determine whether your capacity for internal contradiction is a strength or a fatal flaw. The void around them began to shift again, and Marcus steeled himself for whatever final revelation awaited. The fate of his species hung in the balance, and he was beginning to suspect that humanity's salvation or damnation lay not in choosing between their contradictory impulses, but in their stubborn refusal to choose at all. The void dissolved into something Marcus recognized, but had never seen with his own eyes: the bridge of Earth's first interstellar colony ship, the Endeavor. The massive vessel stretched beyond the viewport like a city wrapped in metal and ceramic, its rotating sections generating artificial gravity for the 50,000 colonists sleeping in cryogenic suspension. This was humanity's greatest achievement, their first successful attempt to spread life beyond the solar system. This was 4 years ago, Varaneth explained as they observed the bustling bridge crew. The Endeavor had just completed its 70-year journey to Kepler 442b, a world your scientists had identified as potentially habitable. What the colonists discovered there would test humanity's relationship with power in ways they never anticipated. Marcus watched Captain Elena Vasquez review sensor data with her senior staff. She was a woman in her 60s, awakened from cryo 6 months before arrival to oversee the final approach. Her crew was young, born during the voyage in the ship's minimal active population, raised specifically to handle this moment in human history. Initial scans confirm the planet is habitable, reported Science Officer Chinwei, a man perhaps 30 years old who had never seen Earth except in archived recordings. Oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere, liquid water, temperature ranges suitable for human life. But there's something else. Captain Vasquez leaned forward in her chair. Life signs. Extensive, but not what we expected. Chin's voice carried a mixture of excitement and concern. The planet supports a complex ecosystem, but the dominant species appears to be primitive by our standards. Pre-industrial. They've achieved agriculture and basic metallurgy, but no advanced technology. Marcus felt his stomach tighten as he realized what he was witnessing. First contact. Indeed, Varaneth confirmed, but not the kind your species had prepared for. Instead of meeting equals or superiors, humanity encountered a civilization thousands of years behind your technological development. This presented a choice that would reveal something fundamental about human nature when holding absolute power over another species. The scene shifted to show the planet's surface as seen through orbital sensors. Vast continents covered in green, with clusters of simple settlements connected by dirt roads. The native population appeared humanoid, but distinctly alien, taller than humans, with elongated limbs and skin that showed a subtle iridescent quality. They lived in harmony with their environment, their cities integrated seamlessly into natural formations. "They're beautiful," whispered Dr. Sarah Kim, the expedition's xenobiologist. "Look at how they've built their settlements. They're enhancing the natural landscape instead of replacing it. Their technology works with biological systems rather than against them." "Beautiful, yes," said Commander Thomas Harrison, the military attaché, "but also vulnerable. They have no space technology, no advanced weapons, no defense against orbital bombardment. If they prove hostile, we could pacify the entire planet from orbit without losing a single human life." Captain Vasquez studied the readings with the weight of history on her shoulders. "The question is what we do with that capability. 50,000 colonists need a place to live, and this planet can certainly support them. The native population appears to number in the hundreds of millions, but their technology level means they're using perhaps 5% of the planet's resources." "Are you suggesting we simply take what we need?" Dr. Kim asked, her voice sharp with concern. I'm suggesting we consider our options pragmatically, Commander Harrison replied. Earth spent vast resources on this mission. Those colonists in cryopods invested their entire lives in the promise of a new world. We have a moral obligation to secure their future. We also have a moral obligation not to become conquerors, Dr. Kim countered. These people have as much right to their world as we do. Marcus watched this debate unfold with growing unease, recognizing the terrible position the colonists faced. They had traveled 70 years to reach this world, burning bridges to Earth in the process. The ship's resources were finite, and returning to Earth was not an option. They needed a place to live, but that place was already inhabited. What would most species do in this situation? Marcus asked Veroneth. Historically, there are 3 common responses, she replied. Aggressive species typically eliminate the natives and claim the planet entirely. Cooperative species attempt to establish contact and negotiate shared use of resources. Transcendent species often choose to find another world rather than disturb primitive civilizations. And humanity? Humanity chose something unprecedented. Watch. The scene shifted to show Captain Vasquez in her private quarters, reviewing historical records of human colonization and first contact scenarios. Marcus could see her struggling with the weight of decision, knowing that her choice would define humanity's first interaction with alien life. She called a meeting of the senior staff and all department heads, nearly 40 people representing every aspect of the colony mission. I've been thinking about this for weeks, she began. We have the power to take whatever we want from this planet. The natives couldn't stop us if they tried. But the question isn't what we can do, it's what we should do. And, more importantly, what we can live with. Captain, Commander Harrison interjected, I understand the ethical concerns, but we have practical responsibilities. These colonists trusted us to establish a safe, sustainable settlement. If we limit ourselves to whatever scraps the natives are willing to share, we might not be able to support the population we're carrying. And if we take what we want by force, Dr. Kim shot back, we become the very thing our species has always claimed to oppose. We become the monsters from our own historical nightmares. The debate that followed was unlike anything Marcus had expected. Instead of a simple military or diplomatic solution, the humans chose to engage in something messier and, more complex, they decided to observe the natives extensively before making any contact at all. For 6 months, the Endeavour remained in high orbit while teams of scientists studied the alien civilization from a distance. They learned the natives' languages, observed their customs, analyzed their social structures. What they discovered challenged every assumption about primitive civilizations. They're not primitive, Dr. Kim reported to an assembly of all awakened colonists. They're intentionally technological minimalists. They possess knowledge that could support much more advanced technology, but they've chosen not to develop it. Why would they make that choice? Asked Maria Santos, the chief engineer. Because they've learned from their history, Dr. Kim explained. We found evidence of an earlier technological period in their development, industrial ruins that they've deliberately allowed to be reclaimed by nature. It appears they once had a civilization similar to Earth's current level, but they chose to step back from it. The revelation sent shockwaves through the colonial community. These weren't ignorant primitives who could be easily dismissed or overwhelmed. They were a species that had consciously chosen a different path of development. They know about space travel, reported Lieutenant Commander Jensen, who had been monitoring their electromagnetic emissions. They have radio technology, but they use it sparingly. They know about metallurgy and chemistry that could support advanced manufacturing, but they deliberately limit production to sustainable levels. They've chosen quality of life over technological power. Captain Vasquez faced an impossible decision. Contact with such a civilization couldn't be approached with the usual colonial playbook. These people had deliberately rejected the kind of technological advancement that had allowed humans to reach their world. What if we're the primitive ones? Asked Dr. Kim during one particularly intense planning session. What if they've evolved beyond the need to dominate their environment, while we're still trapped in expansion and consumption patterns that might ultimately be self-destructive? The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything the colonists had assumed about progress and civilization. Captain Vasquez made a decision that no other species in Confederation records had ever attempted. Instead of imposing human will on the planet, She chose to ask for permission to stay. We're going to approach them as refugees, she announced. We're going to tell them the truth, that we're homeless, that we need a place to live, and that we're asking for shelter. We're going to offer our technology and knowledge in exchange for a small portion of their world, and we're going to accept whatever conditions they set. Commander Harrison was aghast. Captain, you're giving them all the power in this relationship. They could demand anything. They could refuse us entirely. Yes, they could, she agreed. And that's what will make this a genuine negotiation instead of a veiled conquest. The first contact took place on a neutral island in the planet's largest ocean. Captain Vasquez descended to the surface with a small diplomatic team, carrying gifts but no weapons. The native delegation was led by an individual Marcus learned was called Kethvar, an elderly being whose iridescent skin carried patterns that seemed to shift with emotion. You have traveled very far, Kethvar said in carefully learned English, to reach a world that is already home to others. We have, Captain Vasquez admitted. Our own world became difficult to live on. We seek permission to share yours. What followed was perhaps the most unusual negotiation in human history. Instead of demands or threats, both sides engaged in what could only be described as mutual evaluation. The natives wanted to understand human nature before welcoming them, while the humans were learning to see civilization from an entirely different perspective. You consume resources rapidly, observed Kethvar after several weeks of discussions. You build quickly, reproduce prolifically, and seek always to expand your presence. This is concerning. It's our nature, Captain Vasquez replied honestly. But we're capable of learning. We've seen what our rapid expansion did to our home world, and many of us want to find a better way. And yet you came here in a ship that represents the consumption of vast resources from a dying world. You speak of learning while carrying tools that could destroy our entire civilization if you chose to use them. The captain had no easy answer for this contradiction, because Kethvar was absolutely right. The Endeavor represented the pinnacle of human technological achievement, but it was also the product of resource extraction and environmental exploitation that had helped render Earth barely habitable. We are what we are, she finally said. We can't undo our past or change our fundamental nature, but we can choose how to act going forward. We can choose to be guests instead of conquerors. Kethvar's skin patterns shifted to what the xenolinguistics team had identified as contemplation. This choice you speak of, it is difficult for your species? Very difficult. Our instincts push us toward expansion and control. Choosing restraint requires constant conscious effort. Then perhaps, Kethvar said slowly, this is what makes your species interesting. You struggle with impulses that you recognize as destructive, and sometimes you choose to resist those impulses. This is unusual. Marcus watched the negotiations continue for months. The natives ultimately agreed to allow human settlement, but with conditions that would challenge every assumption about colonial development. The humans would be limited to specific regions and could only expand with explicit native permission. They would share their medical knowledge freely, but could not introduce industrial technology without approval. Most importantly, they would accept native advisors in their governing structure, creating the first truly integrated interspecies society in known history. It should have been a disaster, Varaneth observed as the scene shifted to show the successful colony 5 years later. Two species with radically different approaches to civilization, forced to share limited space and resources. But instead, something remarkable happened. Marcus saw a settlement unlike anything in human history. Human engineering and alien biological architecture merged seamlessly. Humans had learned to build with living materials that grew and adapted over time, while the natives had selectively adopted human medical technology that extended their lifespans without disturbing their ecological balance. More surprisingly, the human colonists were thriving under the imposed limitations. Without the pressure to maximize resource extraction and expand constantly, they had developed art, philosophy, and scientific inquiry that exceeded anything they might have achieved in a traditional colony. The natives taught us that growth doesn't have to mean consumption, explained Dr. Kim in a recorded interview Marcus was observing. Human creativity, when not focused on domination and expansion, finds incredible outlets in collaboration and synthesis. But the most remarkable aspect, Varaneth noted, was what happened when the natives offered to share their most advanced knowledge. Marcus watched a ceremony where Kethvar presented Captain Vasquez with what appeared to be a simple crystal. This contains the understanding needed to manipulate matter at the quantum level, Kethvar explained. With this knowledge, your people could reshape this world to match any environment you choose. You could become gods of your own reality. Captain Vasquez held the crystal carefully. Why are you offering this to us? Because you have proven that power does not necessarily corrupt your species. You had the ability to take our world by force, but chose to ask permission. You have lived under our restrictions for 5 years without attempting to circumvent them. You have shown that humans can choose limitation even when unlimited power is within reach. And if we abuse this gift, Kethvar's skin patterns shifted to what Marcus recognized as sad amusement. Then we will know that our evaluation was incorrect, and we will take appropriate measures. But we do not believe that will be necessary. Marcus watched Captain Vasquez consider the crystal for long minutes. What did she do with it? She accepted it, Varaneth replied. But rather than using it immediately, the Human Council chose to establish ethical guidelines for its use that required approval from both human and native representatives. They had learned that the ability to reshape reality was meaningless without wisdom about when and how to apply such power. The scene faded, leaving Marcus in contemplation of what he'd witnessed. This is what convinced the confluence that humanity might be different. This demonstrated that your species possesses something unprecedented, the ability to voluntarily limit your own power, even when doing so conflicts with your apparent nature. Most species either seek maximum power or voluntarily minimize their impact. Humanity appears capable of seeking power while simultaneously constraining its use. And that's good. It's unprecedented. Whether it's good or bad depends on whether this represents maturity or internal contradiction that will eventually tear your species apart. Varaneth's expression grew thoughtful. The Confluence has been debating this question since we began observing these events. You have shown compassion in disaster, wisdom in transcendence, and restraint with power. But you have also shown the opposites of all these traits. You are a species at war with itself. Marcus thought about everything he'd witnessed. Humans sacrificing themselves to save strangers while others hoarded resources for themselves. Minds transcending biology while insisting on remaining human. Colonists choosing limitation while possessing unlimited power. Maybe that's exactly what the universe needs, he said quietly. A species that embodies all possibilities simultaneously. Varaneth stared at him for a long moment. You may be right, or you may be catastrophically wrong. That is what we must now decide. The void around them began to shift one final time, and Marcus realized he was about to face the moment when humanity's fate would be determined. Everything he'd witnessed, all the contradictions and complexities of his species, would be weighed in a balance whose outcome would determine whether humanity joined the stars or faded into silence. The future of every human who had ever lived or ever would live now hung on whatever judgment was about to be rendered. The void around Marcus transformed into something beyond his ability to fully comprehend. He found himself standing in what could only be described as a vast amphitheater of consciousness, where beings of impossible variety gathered to witness and participate in humanity's judgment. Some appeared as geometric patterns of living light, others as shifting energy fields that communicated through harmonics he could feel in his bones. Still others seemed to exist as pure thought given temporary form. The Confluence, Varaneth explained, her own appearance shifting to match the ethereal nature of their surroundings. Representatives of every sapient species that has passed the trials of conscious evaluation. 47 civilizations, each contributing their perspective to the question of humanity's future. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the sheer scope of awareness focused on him. Millions of years of accumulated wisdom and experience, all brought to bear on the question of whether his species deserved to continue existing. He was a single human representing the entirety of his kind before a tribunal of cosmic proportions. Do not be afraid, Varaneth said gently. You are here as witness and advocate, not as defendant. The confluence does not judge you personally, but rather the pattern of consciousness that your species represents. A presence spoke, not with words, but with concepts that formed directly in Marcus's mind. It identified itself as the Zethmore Collective, a hive mind species that had achieved interstellar travel through perfect cooperation and shared consciousness. We have observed the humans, the presence communicated. Their individual consciousness creates chaos and inefficiency. They struggle against each other when cooperation would serve them better. They maintain separate identities when unity would grant them power beyond measure. How can such a fractured species contribute to cosmic harmony? Another consciousness responded, this one calling itself the Vraknari Assembly, a species of beings who had transcended physical form entirely and existed as pure intellect. The human's attachment to physical sensation and emotional irrationality limits their potential, they observed. We have seen them choose suffering over enlightenment, attachment over transcendence. They cling to biological limitations that prevent them from achieving their full cognitive potential. They are trapped in evolutionary patterns that should have been discarded eons ago. Marcus felt a surge of defensive anger, but before he could speak, Veroneth placed a restraining hand on his arm. Let them speak their concerns, she advised. Your response will come later. A third voice joined the discussion. The Kethran synthesis, representatives of species that had perfectly balanced individual and collective consciousness. The observations are accurate, they acknowledged, but incomplete. Yes, humans display chaotic individual behavior and irrational attachment to limitation. But they also demonstrate something unprecedented, the ability to consciously choose patterns that contradict their apparent nature. We have never encountered a species that could simultaneously embody cooperation and competition, transcendence and limitation, power and restraint. That is precisely the problem. Interjected another presence. The Morthak hegemony, a species that had achieved galactic dominance before voluntarily joining the confluence. Inconsistency in a sapient species becomes unpredictability on a cosmic scale. How can we trust beings whose actions cannot be predicted by their nature or their stated intentions? The debate continued for what felt like hours, with dozens of different species contributing their perspectives on humanity's contradictory nature. Marcus listened to civilizations that had achieved perfect harmony arguing that human conflict was a sign of evolutionary failure. He heard from transcendent beings who viewed human attachment to mortality as primitive stubbornness. Species after species pointed to humanity's internal contradictions as evidence of fundamental instability. But gradually a different perspective began to emerge from some quarters. I wish to speak, came a voice that seemed somehow familiar, though Marcus had never heard it before. The presence identified itself as the Kepler Collective, and, with a shock, Marcus realized these were the natives from the planet where the Endeavor had settled. We have lived alongside humans for 7 of their years, the Kepler representative continued. We have observed their nature not from distant monitoring, but through daily interaction. Yes, they are contradictory. Yes, they struggle with impulses that often conflict with their stated values. But this struggle is not weakness. It is consciousness examining itself. The amphitheater fell silent as the Kepler Collective continued their testimony. Before humans arrived at our world, we had achieved perfect harmony with our environment and with ourselves. We had resolved the contradictions that plague younger species and found peace in limitation and wisdom. But in 40,000 years of such peace, we had created nothing new. We had achieved stability at the cost of growth. The humans brought chaos to our ordered world, but they also brought possibility. Their refusal to choose between seemingly contradictory options has led to innovations we never imagined. They have shown us that the resolution of all contradictions might not be the highest form of consciousness, merely one form among many. Marcus felt a stirring of hope as other voices began to support the Kepler perspective. The Zephyrian Accord has observed similar patterns, announced another presence. In our monitoring of pre-contact human civilization, we noted that their greatest achievements often came from individuals who refused to accept that certain choices were mutually exclusive. They created art that was both beautiful and functional, science that was both rigorous and imaginative, societies that valued both individual freedom and collective responsibility. But such achievements came at terrible cost, countered the Vragnari Assembly. Human history is littered with wars, environmental destruction, and social upheaval caused by their inability to resolve contradictory impulses. How many civilizations must suffer while they learn to control their chaotic nature? The debate intensified, with species taking sides based on their own evolutionary experiences and philosophical frameworks. Those who had achieved harmony through resolution of contradictions viewed humanity as dangerously unstable. Those who had experienced growth through managed conflict saw potential in humanity's chaotic creativity. Finally, Veroneth spoke into the growing cacophony of opinion. The question before us is not whether humanity is perfect, she said, her voice cutting through the debate with crystalline clarity. The question is whether their imperfection represents a fatal flaw or an evolutionary breakthrough. We must consider what consciousness itself might be capable of becoming. She gestured toward Marcus, who suddenly found himself the focus of cosmic attention. Marcus Chon of Earth, Veroneth said formally, you have observed your species through our eyes and witnessed their actions in moments of crisis, opportunity, and power. You have seen both their nobility and their darkness. Now you must speak for humanity, not to defend their actions, but to explain their nature. Help us understand what it means to be human. Marcus felt the weight of billions of lives resting on his words. Everything humanity had ever been or could become hung in the balance of this moment. He thought of the people he'd watched sacrifice themselves for strangers, and those who'd abandoned others to save themselves. He thought of Dr. Chin choosing to remain mortal while creating digital immortality, and of Captain Vasquez accepting limitations while wielding unlimited power. You want to know what it means to be human, he began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. It means being torn between what we are and what we want to be. It means holding contradictory truths simultaneously and somehow finding wisdom in the tension between them. He paused, gathering his thoughts, knowing that the fate of a species depended on finding the right words. Every other species you've described seems to have found a final answer to the question of how consciousness should exist. You've achieved harmony or transcendence or perfect cooperation or ultimate wisdom. You've resolved your contradictions and found peace in your solutions. And that is precisely why you need us, Marcus continued, his conviction growing. Because consciousness that has found all its answers has stopped growing. Consciousness that has resolved all its contradictions has stopped questioning. You've achieved perfection at the cost of possibility. The amphitheater buzzed with responses, some approving, others skeptical, all intensely interested. Humans don't resolve contradictions. We live with them, Marcus explained. We love individuals and serve communities. We seek truth and embrace mysteries. We want power and choose limitation. We reach for transcendence while celebrating mortality. And yes, this creates chaos. Yes, it leads to conflict and confusion and terrible mistakes. But it also creates something none of you have achieved in millions of years of perfection. Surprise. Une surprise yourself. We do things that contradict our nature, exceed our limitations, and defy our own predictions. We're not stable because we're not finished. We're not harmonious because we're still growing. And maybe that's what the universe needs, Marcus concluded. Maybe consciousness itself needs a species that refuses to be complete, that insists on remaining gloriously, chaotically, unpredictably human. The silence that followed felt eternal. Marcus could sense vast minds processing his words, weighing them against eons of accumulated wisdom and experience. The fate of humanity hung in the balance of cosmic deliberation. Finally, a new voice spoke, one that seemed to contain elements of all the others, as if the entire confluence was speaking with one voice. Marcus Chon of Earth, the combined presence said, your words reveal something we had not fully considered. In our pursuit of cosmic harmony, we may have prioritized stability over growth, resolution over possibility. Perhaps consciousness itself benefits from the existence of species that embody all possibilities simultaneously. However, the voice continued, and Marcus felt his heart sink. Such a conclusion cannot be reached through argument alone. If humanity is to join the confluence, you must prove that your chaotic nature can coexist with cosmic responsibility. You will be granted a trial period, 50 of your years, during which humanity will have access to limited confluence technologies and knowledge. During this trial, we will observe how your species handles power when extended gradually rather than all at once. We will see whether your contradictory nature leads to growth and innovation or to the kind of catastrophic instability that has destroyed other promising species. Marcus felt relief and terror in equal measure. A reprieve, but not absolution. What happens if we fail the trial? Then, the silence will come, Veroneth answered quietly. But if you succeed, if humanity proves that consciousness can remain eternally unfinished while still being cosmically responsible, then you will not merely join the confluence. You will transform it. Transform it how? By teaching 47 ancient civilizations how to be surprised again. By showing perfected species that growth might be more valuable than harmony. By proving that the highest form of consciousness might not be the resolution of all contradictions, but the wisdom to live creatively within them. Marcus felt the weight of impossible possibility settling on his shoulders. Humanity had been given a chance, not just to survive, but to revolutionize the nature of consciousness itself throughout the galaxy. One question remains, the collective voice said. Will you accept this responsibility on behalf of your species? Marcus thought of every human he'd ever known, every person who would be born in the centuries to come, every contradiction and possibility that made humanity what it was. The choice was overwhelming, but somehow, in the face of cosmic magnitude, the answer was simple. Yes, he said, we accept. The amphitheater dissolved around him, but not before Marcus caught one last communication from Veroneth. Remember, Marcus Chun of Earth, you're no longer merely human. You're the first of something new. The question is what you will choose to become. Marcus found himself back in his familiar quarters aboard the mining station Prometheus, but everything had changed. The stars outside his viewport were no longer distant points of light. They were destinations, possibilities, gateways to a future he could barely imagine. His hands, as he held them up to the light, seemed somehow different, as if the cells themselves remembered the cosmic amphitheater and the weight of responsibility he'd accepted. The transition back to normal consciousness can be disorienting, Veroneth said, materializing beside him with the same impossible grace as when she'd first appeared. You have experienced perspectives that human minds were not designed to contain. It will take time for your neural pathways to adapt to the expanded awareness. How long was I gone? Marcus asked, checking his chronometer. To his surprise, only 6 hours had passed since Veroneth's first appearance. Time flows differently when consciousness is unmoored from its local space-time reference frame, she explained. In linear time, our conversation lasted mere hours. In experiential time, you have lived through observations spanning decades of human history. Both measurements are equally valid and equally incomplete. Marcus moved to his communication console, driven by an urgent need to contact Earth, to warn humanity about what was coming. But Veroneth's gentle touch on his arm stopped him. That communication will not reach your homeworld, she said. We have established what your species would call a temporal buffer zone around this conversation. Knowledge of the trial period must be disseminated carefully, through proper channels, to avoid the kind of panic or premature preparation that could invalidate the test. So, I'm supposed to just sit here and wait while humanity stumbles blindly toward a test that will determine our entire future. Veroneth's expression showed something that might have been sympathy. You're not meant to sit and wait. You're meant to begin the work of preparation. You have been chosen as humanity's first confluence liaison, the bridge between your species and the greater community of consciousness. Your role is to help humanity develop the wisdom necessary to handle the gifts and responsibilities that await them. Marcus felt the magnitude of this role settling on him like a physical weight. How am I supposed to do that? I'm one person, stuck on a mining station in the middle of nowhere. Distance is a relative concept when consciousness can operate outside local space-time constraints, Varaneth replied. You now carry within your awareness the accumulated perspective of 47 galactic civilizations. That awareness can be shared, transmitted, and multiplied through channels that don't require conventional communication. She gestured toward the viewport, where the stars had begun to pulse with subtle rhythms that Marcus somehow understood were patterns of meaning. You will teach by example, influence through inspiration, and guide through the kind of indirect leadership that humans seem to excel at. Your species' preference for distributed authority rather than centralized control makes you uniquely suited for the kind of gentle guidance that consciousness evolution requires. What about the technologies you mentioned? The confluence knowledge that humanity will have access to during the trial period. They will begin manifesting within the next 5 of your years, Varaneth explained. New discoveries that seem to arise naturally from human research, but are actually guided insights into universal principles. Medical breakthroughs that extend healthy human lifespan to roughly 2 centuries. Energy technologies that make resource scarcity obsolete. Transportation methods that make interstellar travel practical for civilian populations. Marcus tried to imagine the impact such revelations would have on human civilization. Won't that cause massive social upheaval? Wars over who controls the new technologies? Economic collapse as entire industries become obsolete overnight. That is part of the test, Varaneth acknowledged. How humanity handles the transition to post-scarcity civilization will determine whether they possess the wisdom necessary for full confluence membership. Many species have failed this specific trial. They develop the technology to transcend their limitations, but lack the social evolution to use it responsibly. And if we fail, then the technologies will gradually cease to function. The knowledge will fade from human memory, and your species will settle back into pre-contact patterns of development. The silence will not come immediately, but eventually the spark of curiosity and innovation that drives human growth will dim. Within a few generations, humanity will become content with limited horizons and local concerns. Consciousness will remain, but the drive toward expansion and transcendence will quietly disappear. Marcus shuddered at the clinical description of his species' potential extinction. How many species have passed the trial period? Of the 47 current confluence members, 31 passed on their first trial. 16 required multiple attempts before achieving successful integration. No species has ever been granted more than 3 trial periods. And how many have failed completely? Varaneth was quiet for a long moment. Approximately 4,000 across all observed galaxies and reality configurations. The number hit Marcus like a physical blow. Thousands of entire civilizations wiped from existence because they couldn't handle the transition to cosmic citizenship. What gives you the right to make these decisions? Who appointed the confluence as judges of consciousness? No one appointed us, Varaneth replied, her tone carrying something like sadness. We appointed ourselves, because the alternative is chaos on a scale that threatens the stability of consciousness itself. Young civilizations with access to cosmic-level technologies have historically caused damage that spans multiple galaxies and reality layers. The confluence exists to prevent such catastrophes. But surely there must be another way. Some method that doesn't require the potential extinction of entire species. We have searched for alternatives for 700 million years, Varaneth said. Every option we have discovered ultimately comes down to the same choice: controlled evolution of consciousness under careful guidance, or uncontrolled expansion that leads to civilizational collapse on an unimaginable scale. The trial period represents our most refined approach to this challenge. Marcus turned back to the viewport, watching the pulsing patterns of starlight that he now understood were communications from other confluence members. Distant civilizations were discussing humanity's trial, sharing insights and concerns across impossible distances. The entire galaxy was watching to see what humans would become. There's something you're not telling me, he said quietly. Something about why humanity's trial is different from the others. Varaneth's form seemed to shimmer with uncertainty. You are observant. Yes, there's something unique about humanity's situation. You are the first species to be granted a trial period without unanimous confluence approval. Marcus turned to face her fully. What does that mean? It means that 17 of the 47 member civilizations voted against your trial. They believe humanity's contradictory nature represents too great a risk, regardless of its potential benefits. They have agreed to the trial period only because the remaining 30 civilizations were willing to take responsibility for any consequences. Consequences like what? If humanity fails catastrophically, if you gain access to cosmic technologies and use them in ways that threaten other civilizations, then the 17 dissenting members have the right to demand not just humanity's extinction, but the dissolution of the current confluence structure. Marcus felt cold spreading through his chest. So if we fail, we take down the entire galactic community with us. In essence, yes. The stakes of your trial extend far beyond humanity's survival. The future of consciousness itself, at least in this galaxy, may depend on whether your species can learn to balance its contradictory impulses with cosmic responsibility. The magnitude of this revelation left Marcus speechless. He had thought the pressure of representing humanity was overwhelming. Now he learned that 47 entire civilizations were betting their own existence on humanity's ability to mature into cosmic citizenship. Why didn't you tell me this during the trial? He finally asked. Because the decision had to be made based on humanity's essential nature, not on the external pressures surrounding that nature. The confluence needed to see whether humans could advocate for themselves based on genuine self-understanding, not on fear of consequences. Marcus laughed, though there was no humor in it. And you think this pressure will somehow help us succeed where thousands of other species have failed? I think, Veroneth said carefully, that pressure is something humanity has always responded to in unexpected ways. Your species seems to perform best when the stakes are impossibly high, and the odds are overwhelmingly against you. Perhaps that is what makes you unique among conscious beings. Or perhaps that's what will destroy us. Perhaps that is what we will discover together. Marcus moved to his workstation and began composing a message, not to Earth's governments or military structures, but to individual scientists, artists, philosophers, and dreamers scattered across human civilization. People who might be able to handle the kind of impossible revelation he needed to share. What are you doing? Veroneth asked. Something very human, Marcus replied as he worked. I'm going to tell people just enough of the truth to make them curious, without telling them so much that they panic. I'm going to plant seeds of ideas that will grow into the kind of thinking humanity will need for the trial period. I'm going to trust that my species' chaotic creativity will find solutions that 47 ancient civilizations couldn't imagine. That is a significant gamble. Everything about humanity is a significant gamble, Marcus said, activating his communication array. But that's what makes us interesting. As his messages began transmitting toward Earth, Marcus felt something he hadn't expected: hope. Not because humanity was guaranteed to succeed, but because failure itself might teach the galaxy something valuable about the nature of consciousness and possibility. Veroneth, he said as she began to fade back into the cosmic background. One last question. What happens if humanity succeeds beyond all expectations? What if we don't just pass the trial, but actually transform the confluence in ways no one anticipates? Her form solidified once more, and for the first time, Marcus saw something like excitement in her ancient features. Then, Marcus Chun of Earth, consciousness itself will take an evolutionary leap that spans the entire universe. 47 perfected civilizations will remember what it feels like to grow, to change, to become something unprecedented. And if we fail, then the universe will be exactly as wise and harmonious as it was before humanity arose, which, considering recent events, may not be wise enough for what's coming. What's coming? But Veroneth was already gone, leaving only starlight and possibility and the weight of a future that would be determined by humanity's ability to remain magnificently, chaotically, impossibly human while becoming something greater than they'd ever imagined. Marcus looked out at the stars one last time as a mining engineer alone in the void. When he turned away from the viewport, it would be as humanity's first ambassador to infinity, charged with preparing his species for a trial that would determine not just their survival, but the future of consciousness itself. The real adventure, he realized, was just beginning. Outside his station, The stars pulsed with the rhythm of 47 civilizations holding their collective breath, waiting to see what humans would choose to become. In a vast cosmic conversation that spanned galaxies and realities, humanity was about to add its voice for the first time. Marcus smiled as he began the work of teaching his species how to sing in harmony with the universe, while somehow managing to remain perfectly, chaotically, gloriously themselves. After all, that contradiction was the most human thing of all.